Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Grace Hatfield with EHS Daily Advisor, and thank you for tuning in to today's episode of Faces of EHS. This is a segment where we feature environmental health and safety professionals and highlight their journeys and hear their thoughts about EHS trends and issues. Today, we are joined by Danielle Posa, who is the founder of Workplace Wellbeing Advisors. So, hi, Danielle, how are you today?
Hi, I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you for asking. So, can you tell us a little bit about your work at Workplace Wellbeing Advisors and what you guys do as an organization?
Yeah, sure. So it's my company, and I've been doing management consulting for a long time. Started my career at Gallup, and basically overall, what we do is we help create culturally integrated well-being strategies. So basically, what that means is not just creating like a program or a short-term initiative. We really look at how do you make well-being part of the culture, part of the entire employee life cycle, something that's really a long-term commitment. How do you measure that? How do you ingrain it into different parts of the organization and departments? So yeah, so that's what we do, and so we help design the strategy and help execute it and advise on it as well.
Awesome. So let's jump right in. How did you get your start in the field?
Well, I would say like my more official career started at Gallup. So I was a consultant. I was a consultant there right out of college. And I just really gravitated to that organization. It was actually the only company I interviewed for. And it really just attracted me because I was always a big believer in in people, and that like I just always was fascinated by psychology and philosophy and things like that. And Gallup just had some of the best sciences in the world in terms of understanding human behavior. And the whole philosophy of Gallup was that people are a company's greatest asset. And so I knew that the nature of our work was going into organizations and kind of preaching that message and teaching organizations how to engage their employees. And so I love that. So that was where I started, and I was there for about 4 years before I left to do my own thing.
Very cool. So, who's been your biggest influence in your career?
Oh, well, that actually I would probably say there's two people. One actually I would say was the CEO of Gallup, Jim Clifton at the time. Because while I was there, Gallup published, what was then the world's largest study on well-being. And so they did this study on, what really makes life worthwhile, and asked people questions all around the world. And I had cancer as a kid, and I've always been
Hmm.
really passionate about like what does make life worthwhile. Like I think I've just
Hmm.
always cared about that question. And so the CEO, when that research came out, he started to talk about this idea that, you know, well-being should really be a measurement of success in society. That if we can measure well-being properly, if countries were measuring well-being, if cities were measuring well-being, if companies were measuring well-being, that would really change the game, because metrics rule the world, right? Like,
Hmm.
metrics are what people are focused on at boardroom tables, right? And so that idea just really, really stuck with me, because I thought the research was so important. I believed so much that the goal of society is not just, you know, growth and driving revenue and GDP, but that like all that doesn't matter if we don't have lives that are fulfilling, right? So I just, as when he said that, I just really latched on to that. And um and I really give him credit, because I was only 23 at the time, and I told him, he used to tell everybody in the company, find something that you want to be the best in the world at.
Hmm.
And I remember thinking, when that research came out and when the well-being book was published, that I want to be the best in the world at well-being. I like said that to myself, right? And I was 23, and I sent him an email saying that,
Hmm.
which is funny in retrospect. Now I'm 37 and I'm like, oh, wow, that was pretty gutsy as a 23-year-old. But he followed up on that, and he actually took me to lunch with Deepak Chopra and
Oh,
said, I'm going to
wow.
be talking. Yeah, he said, I'm going to be having lunch with Deepak. We're going to be talking about the well-being research. Why don't you come along? Because he knew I was so passionate about it. And so that leads me to the second biggest influence, which is Deepak. But I really just, I give Jim a lot of credit for just like, seeing that I had that passion and taking a chance on me and getting kind of plugging me into the right, kind of into the right zone, which has
Mhm.
really changed my career, because then I was became Deepak's like liaison for the well-being research. Deepak and I became close. He became kind of a mentor. We spoke publicly together on several occasions. He has I'd go on meetings with him and learn about consciousness and all these different aspects of well-being that I never even really knew about. And so for the past 10 years, I've worked with Deepak in different ways, and he's been a profound influence on my life, and has connected me with so many people and organizations over that time. And so yeah, definitely those two people for sure.
Wow, yeah, that's really incredible. So what has been your best mistake and what did you learn from it?
Best mistake. That's a good way to ask that that question. Your best mistake. So, I think maybe, one of them is that I feel like I felt, regardless of how much I learned and studied and how hard I worked at like a fairly young age, I think I always felt like I wasn't, I didn't know enough, or I wasn't credible enough, or I wasn't old enough. And it took me, I'm 37 now, and I think it took me a while to really, I guess, own my own, like, just really be confident in my level of expertise in this area and my level of passion around it. And so I think like the mistake is really not, it's weird to say it as a mistake, but I guess it's more almost like a regret. Like
Mm,
I wish that I had kind of been like really owned myself at an earlier age, because I would have liked to have been, like doing more earlier. And I felt like I kind of delayed my progress to an extent
mm,
because of my own kind of limiting, beliefs. And so, but at the same time, I don't really have like real regret. I do believe everything happens for a reason, but now in terms of what I learned from it, anytime those kinds of thoughts come up, which I do think we all have them to a certain extent, but when those thoughts come up, I just have ways of like reminding myself of how much I have relentlessly studied and learned, and the experience that I have in this industry. So I know how to kind of deal with
yeah.
self-talk that will come up. But I think that was kind of just, if I recognize that at an earlier age, that's probably one of the things that, if I had a regret, that I regret most.
Yeah, for sure. I get that. I'm actually 23. I know you mentioned you were
Oh,
23 when you
really?
sent
That's
that
funny.
email.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I deal with a lot of imposter syndrome a lot. So I
Mhm.
I feel you on that one.
Yeah,
Um,
totally.
yeah. So speaking of mental health, what is psychological safety and how does it play a role in overall employee well-being?
Yeah, sure. So, like, psychological safety. There was a question actually that has always been on, on the Gallup note, that has always been on engagement surveys, at least from Gallup, which is that my opinions seem to count.
Mm,
And that's kind of, I think, psychological safety in a nutshell, that my opinions matter, that they count, that when I need to speak up or I need to say something about myself or my life or my work or my colleagues, that is heard, and that is not judged, or that it's not downplayed, because there's a lot of, like, when people don't feel psychologically safe, that means that they don't feel like they can raise concerns, or they don't feel like maybe they can talk about something that's going on with them or a personal issue. But then even more so, say you can, that you get the confidence to say something, and then that is met by a manager or a more
Mhm.
senior person um, disregarding that or belittling, the comments in some way, or reducing your concerns. That starts to create this feeling of like, oh, okay, my what I have to say is not valued or protected or respected here, and that erodes the psychological safety. And that is, that has a really big impact on everything, because communication is key to just make work function properly, right? And then it can lead to stress and mental ill health or disengagement, because people start to retreat. They go back all of a sudden, like they don't feel like they can ask for the things that they need in order to do their job correctly, or the other self-talk kicks in, where it's like, well, I raised this concern, but maybe I shouldn't have raised it because my manager didn't like what I had to say, right? And so it creates kind of, it can create that negative kind of self-talk, and then leads to people being like very, very stressed, or feeling kind of isolated, and start to feel lonely, because you start to kind of keep stuff to yourself that really should have been vocalized or talked to, amongst either colleagues or a manager. So did I answer your question? That was what
Yeah.
psychological safety, but was there a second part of it, or?
Oh, it was just the, how does it play a role in overall employee well-being?
Oh yeah, but I feel like I
Yeah, you
pretty
got
much
that.
said that, yeah.
Yeah, so how can leaders make mental health and psychological safety core values within their company policies?
Well, I would say, first of all, it's got to go beyond the core values and the policies, right? Because
Mhm,
yeah, you can just make it a core value. You can make it a value by by stating them, and saying that we care about our employees, and that our opinions are that their opinions matter. But to really activate on those values and those policies, is a different thing. And so
mhm,
um, I think one piece of that is that it really does have to start at the leadership level, where um, leaders are actively making mention of the importance of these things, whether it's in a state of the company meeting, right, or emails that go out to all employees that are saying, we want to hear what you think. What you have to say really matters here. And then having that be evident in all of the micro, what I call like micro communications, and the
mhm,
micro actions, right, of like of being in a Zoom meeting and noticing that somebody is extra quiet, and pinging them after the fact and saying like, hey, is everything okay? Was there anything you had to share in that meeting? Or is there, but it's those little things where it's like the value becomes real, because if you say that you care about, your employees' mental health and well-being, and you care about what they have to say, but you're not demonstrating that through all those little ways, then it's and I think that more time has to be spent at the executive level to really talk about how to shift one's behavior to show that we're valuing, that the leadership is aligned on that. But
mhm,
then, kind of beyond aligning leadership and language and behaviors, then making sure that the right measurement for well-being and engagement is in place. Employee disengagement, or actively disengaged employees are there's a direct link to that and mental ill health. So if you're not measuring engagement and well-being, then there's no way of really, making sure that that value is coming to life without saying, hey, what is our well-being score? How are our employees doing, doing mentally? But often organizations don't really measure it the right way. And that's kind of part of the problem, because it's not just about, like, you don't have to do a full-fledged mental, like, ill health assessment. You have to get a sense of engagement, because if there's disengaged employees, that quickly can turn into, like, mental ill health, right? So you have to kind
Mhm.
of measure it the right way. And but yeah, there's a lot of kind of different things that organizations can do to really, like, activate on those values and policies. The policies are never enough in and of themselves. So
Absolutely, yeah. And what would you say are some strategies for measuring well-being and engagement at work?
well, I mean, I think just, first of all, it's like there's you don't want to ask too many questions. You really have to focus on asking the right questions, the questions that have been proven by research to be at the heart of well-being, to be at the heart of burnout, like, asking the right questions that get to the drivers of burnout, right? So, like,
Mhm.
asking about people's workload, whether or not they feel micromanaged, the sheer number of hours they work, their emotional attachment to their work. Those are all things that have to do with burnout. So you don't want to ask tons of questions, but you want to ask the ones that have been proven to be correlated to business outcomes and performance, but also kind of hitting the nail on the head in terms of what's really driving, things like burnout, or what are the key drivers of overall well-being. So
Mhm.
asking the right questions is definitely part of that. Another part is, not asking too many questions. Um, and and then, I would say there's three kind of main categories that should be part of a proper metric. And one is a foundation of engagement. So, employees absolutely have to be engaged in their work. Otherwise, that erodes overall well-being.
Mhm.
Then asking questions about well-being that hit on the other categories, your emotional well-being, your mental well-being, your social well-being, getting a sense of people's connections and whether or not they have people they can count on, and
Mhm.
financial well-being too. Just to get a whole picture of the employee and asking a handful of questions that give you kind of this well-being bullseye of, like, okay, so now how are people's lives doing overall? So you got
Mhm.
engagement, you have your overall quality of life. And then the third set of questions is making sure you're asking the elements that specifically relate to the workplace. So asking the burnout questions, asking, about the work environment and things that are where the work environment is responsible for, well-being and engagement. So in terms of exactly what those questions are, that's a longer conversation, but those are kind of the
Yeah.
main categories that I recommend, at least.
Gotcha. And you mentioned disengagement earlier. And what is the impact of quiet quitting on workplace culture? And how can safety professionals help employees re-engage with their work?
Yeah, I mean, so quiet quitting, has been used synonymously in some cases with just being not engaged, being the kind of employee that isn't necessarily, like, negative or holding animosity towards the organization, but they're just kind of showing up, they're just
Mhm.
doing the basic and bare minimum, and they're leaving at the end of the day. um you know the the impact, I mean, with whether it's quiet quitting or just, like, just having just people who are just satisfied, I mean, there's an impact in terms of, you're just, like, you really miss out on the upside, right? You miss out on the fact that when those people get maybe resorted, or and when I say resorted, like, I mean, maybe
Mhm.
put into roles that where they'd be more engaged, or when you take an interest in those people to find out what's going on, what's leading to your lack of engagement. When you can move them into the engaged category, or people that feel like where they are more, like, thriving in their careers, like, makes a huge difference, in the organization and performance. And each of those people who are disengaged in their work, that there's a kind of a contagious effect that happens
Mhm.
from that, right? When you have a colleague who's super energized and enthused about the work that they're doing, it kind of adds energy to your work. You start to be like, oh, well, that person's so excited. Like, maybe I can be more excited about this client or this work. Whereas obviously if the person's not, there's this, it might be a little more of a melancholy effect that person
Mhm.
has on the team. So, in terms of what people can do, I mean, I always say that it's more important to be curious than empathetic. I don't,
Mhm.
I think, not everybody has the capacity to be super empathetic, or it really takes a lot of effort, but I think it's easier to be curious. You can ask people questions, find out what's going on. And if you get that sense that somebody's just not really into it, asking questions without judgment, without it feeling like they're in an interrogation, like that, oh, if you one week at work, it was clear that somebody was just not into what it is that they're doing. It's not a matter of coming down on them for it, or showing or making it seem like you're dissatisfied with their performance, but saying, hey, what's going on? Is there anything in particular that's stressing you? How do you feel about your work lately?
Mhm.
Do you feel interested in the work that you're doing? Has there been anything in particular that you found extra challenging this week? But asking questions like that helps open up the dialogue so that you could actually find out, like, what is going on behind the scenes.
Mhm.
Is it a short-term problem? Is it something that can be fixed easily? Is there a frustration happening within the work? Is there a frustration happening at home? Or is it with the job overall? Or is there an issue with the manager, right? And then you start to uncover those things and come up with a solution for it. But the answer to me definitely is not to just fire people, which I've
Mhm.
seen and heard people doing. That's the easy way out, in my opinion. There might be some situations where that's the case, but to me, that's never where it you know where it should start.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, what are some strategies or policies that businesses can implement to promote a better work-life balance for their employees?
Well, I do think there needs to be, it needs to start with work hours, because,
Mhm.
I think companies are, getting better at this, but there are still a lot of cultures out there that have kind of the expectation that people either are always on, or that they're working till like at least 6, 7 o'clock at night. And I mean, I'm a mom of two little kids. I cannot work until that time. And if I had to go to an office every day and then take like a train home or something like that, like, it's impossible to get home to like actually have a meal with my kids or get them ready for bed and stuff like that. So first and foremost, like, actually putting a hard stop on hours and saying, hey, we want you to get home and live your life, and
Mhm.
do that when you're at work. We want you to be highly engaged and into your work. But that's got to be something that's not just on a piece of paper, again, like a
Yeah.
policy, but that it gets kind of, it's an example that's set at the top with people who are valuing that balance in their own life.
Mhm.
The CEO who actually leaves the office at a
Mhm.
reasonable time and encourages those, and that's got to have a trickle down effect, because that permission has to be created there, and set the tone. And then that follows by respecting that when people do go home, that they're not on all the time, and laying down some of the specifics, specifics around that. um and then I think a piece of it, kind of going back to the curiosity standpoint, is asking at the manager level, like having managers ask their employees, what does work life balance mean to you? Right?
Hmm.
Like,
Yeah.
actually starting the conversation there, because a person my age with two kids looks different than you, right? Who's
Mhm.
23. And I assume maybe you don't have two little kids running around and
No.
running home. I don't, okay. I
Not that I know of.
can't assume.
Yeah,
But, for you, maybe it's more about like, like a hobby or a workout class you want to get to, or hanging out with your friends, or doing something, or just
for
like,
sure, yeah.
and so it looks very different. So understanding that, and getting to know the members of your team, is such a big part of it, because it's very different from person to person. And when managers can really be in touch with the lives of their you know team, it it creates so much more connection, between builds the relationship between the manager and their employees, and it really helps them to understand that, like, oh, I want to say to this person, hey, here's, I know we have to get this done by the end of the week, but don't worry about it today. Like, want to make sure you're home in time for your kid's soccer game or whatever. It's like all
Mhm.
those little things, and that knowledge of a person's life goes such a long way.
Absolutely, it's all about consideration.
Hmm. Yeah,
Um,
yeah, it's very
yeah.
true.
So to pivot back to personally, what are you most proud of?
Oh, well, there's a lot of, I guess there's a lot of answers to that question. I mean, I have two little
Mhm.
kids, so I'm proud of them. I'm a proud mom. I love my kids. And I guess, on that note, like, I'm proud of just staying the course with my work, because this, you know, I've I've it's not like there's definitely been challenges in the midst of just having my own business for a while, but there's really never, I feel like I've always been true to myself, and so I'm proud of doing the work that's really aligned with who I am, and like never, kind of wavering from that.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I guess that's
Yeah,
kind of where what I'm most proud of in the the deeper sense, but
for
there's a lot of
sure.
answers to that question.
Yeah, that's a good thing to be proud of, though. And then my last question is, do you have any advice for people entering the workforce?
Yeah, sure. So, I think, there's this, nowadays everybody's looking for a sense of purpose, and I'm a huge believer in that. I feel like I have always, on that last note, I feel like I've always done purpose, like I've always been kind of in this like purpose path.
Mhm.
Um, but like, especially for, younger people entering, I think one of the challenges that companies have now is that they're trying to solve that problem. Not every single job in the market is like solving, world hunger,
Mhm.
and you can't expect to have purpose done to you. So I
Mhm.
think that's part of the something that I've been seeing too, is that it's kind of like, well, I don't get a sense of purpose from my work in this, and it's like then people are switching jobs and trying to find it elsewhere, but it takes work, right? So
Mhm.
my advice would be to really like take time to understand yourself and invest in yourself, not get swayed by comparing yourself to others, and thinking you're just going to be like a influencer on social media, or think, kind of getting caught in that keeping up with the Joneses like mentality of, like, really take time to invest in yourself, and understanding, who you are. I did a lot of like, self development work at an early age that I feel like really helped me get centered in what that path would be. So really thinking about, who you are, what matters to you the most in the world, what are the big problems you're excited to solve, but then being patient with that process, and plugging yourself into the right kind of career path, but not expecting the whole, as long as you're enjoying like the journey and the path, it doesn't have to be the absolute, ideal
Mhm.
job, but you can be inside a job or on a career path where you feel like you're learning and growing and constantly moving towards that ideal,
Yeah.
role, and that will always be fulfilling, even if it's not because it's connected really to who you are. But it has to be work that you are doing and that you
Mhm.
are where you're figuring that out. No one else is going to really like figure that out for you, and they shouldn't. That's not, that's not their job. So,
For sure. Well, great. Thank you so much for your time. I'm really grateful to have had this opportunity to get to know you and hear your
yeah, thanks for having
insights.
me.
Yeah, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you. Thank you. You
Thank
too.
you.